think I'll tell the one about the boy that was never born naturally. He married a beaver woman. And is this generally known, this story? Okay, good. I'm not going to tell the one about the iron dress. I won't have time for that. Okay. There was a man and his wife living alone in the bush, and his wife was lazy, really lazy. And if he came in with moose meat, she wouldn't even get up to admire what he had done. And this was bad for him. And so he warned his wife. He warned his wife, if you continue to be this way, somebody is going to come and visit you. That's very ominous. But she didn't bother. And as it happens, she was about full-term pregnancy at that time. This one's a little gory. So one day, she was just out, slightly outside of the tent. Oh, I got ahead of myself. When that person comes to see you, if the baby has come, I've screwed this one up. There was already one small child. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm old. I'm feeble. Okay. There was already one child. Small. If this person comes, make a little space in the spruce boughs or the balsam boughs in the side of the winter tent, which is where they keep things. It's like their fridge and their cupboard. Put the baby in there and give him an awl, A-W-L, a bone awl to hold. And then you can go outside. Well, she was pregnant with a second child. She went out, and pretty soon, sure enough, here came something that we would say, maybe a week ago, but this is like a Sasquatch with a bad appetite. And so here came this very big, very strong, very ugly, and not well-mannered creature. And so she quickly grabbed up her son and put him in the boughs inside the tent, gave him the awl, went back outside to a fire that she had outside and started doing something industrious. And the Weetigo came and immediately just took his spear and killed the woman. This Weetigo had a little boy with him. And so the little boy was watching how you do what you do. And the father then cut the woman open in a way which traditional Cree still do with the first animal they kill of the season. Instead of slitting them down and skinning from there, cut them down this way. I don't know why people do that, but it's a tradition. When that happened, the baby, who was not injured, fell out on the ground. About that time, the little Weetigo had gone inside the tent to see what was there, anything interesting. And so he was looking to see what was hidden behind the boughs, because that's where interesting things are kept. And he got around finally to where the little boy was, opened the boughs, and here was the little boy. And the Weetigo boy stuck his head out like that. The little boy went like that with his awl and gave him a bloody nose. And so the Weetigo boy ran outside bawling, "I'm nosebleed." And his father said, "Yeah, don't bother me, I'm busy." And so they had their meal off of the unfortunate wife and left. Immediately they left, some mice came, and several of them together picked up the infant and carried it away. Now, this was out of the eyesight of the little boy with the awl, who was scared stiff and who was still where he'd been put. And his father came home and he found the ruin of his family, and he thought, but maybe she remembered what I said. And so he went inside the tent and he found his son. He was greatly relieved. So he packed up his things and took his son, and they went to place that had not such bad memories. And they made their living. Meanwhile, the mice, who had a very small TV, kept the infant, and would feed it, and the infant didn't seem to be interested in all the same things that the mice ate, and so they would steal a little bit of food from the man and bring it back and feed it to the infant. And the infant prospered. And they had to enlarge their TV, and the infant wanted to play outside, and so. This is a younger brother who was never born naturally. That's the Cree name for the story, and it is a key to what happens later. Never born naturally. So they fed the boy, they nurtured the boy, they made toys for the boy. And the boy would go out and shoot a little bow and arrow that they made for him. He would lose his arrows. And meanwhile, his older brother, who didn't know about this, also had toys, bow and arrow, would lose his arrows. And so they would wander looking for the arrows that they lost. And one day, the older brother found the younger brother. He was astonished. And so the younger brother explained that he basically was living with these mice, and he was really glad to see that he had a brother and he wanted to be able to play with his brother. And he would ask the mice if that was okay. And so at first the mice said, well, your older brother can come and play with you here around the tent, but he has to go home before his father comes back in the evening. Okay? And so that's what they did. But then it got kind of boring because the mice had such a small place. And because kids get that way. And so the younger brother asked the mice, can I go and play with my older brother around his father's TV? And the mice were a little worried about this, but they said, well, when the father comes home, he's going to see not just his own son's tracks in the snow, he's going to see two sets of tracks. His son's, and then these little tracks. And he's going to say, who is this? And that's when the older brother is going to have to say, oh, I was just walking on my heels. Well, that's a lie. It starts a chain of events. So that's what they did. And for some time, they played together and they had a really good time. And they grew. And finally, I don't know how old that younger brother was, but he was pretty mobile and pretty capable. And so the mice decided he was old enough now so that he could stay with his older brother all the time, even though the father was away all the time and couldn't look after them the way the mice could look after this youngster. And so you can go now and live with your older brother and your father and tell them the story of how this happened. And so they did. And the father was really very touched that the mice would take the trouble and be so nurturant and so on. And so he took some of the best food that he had saved and said, take this to the mice and thank them. And of course, ever since that time, mice have had a little bit of the food of humans as a continuing payment. And so the boys lived together, and they grew to adulthood. And they noticed that their father always went off in the same direction in the morning. And they wondered where he went. And they were roaming further and further from the tent now. And their father told them, you can go around, don't get lost, but never go down my trail. They didn't know it, but the father had found a lynx swan. So he had another tent and another family. And so, of course, being boys, they could only take that advice for so long. And they had to follow the path. And so when they got there, they didn't know who this lynx woman was. They didn't know who the little lynx were. And so they had their bows and arrows, and so they shot them. And they were very pleased because this was their first significant hunting experience. And so they took one of the little lynxes back with them and put it on a plate with a piece of caribou skin over it. And they said, when our father comes back, he'll be so proud of us. So the father came back, and they said, Father, look what we've done. The man burst into tears and turned around and ran back down that path. Now, a grown man would cry only at the death of a very close relative, in this case his wife. And they knew that. And so they said, I guess we have killed our stepmother and our cousins. I guess now our father is going to kill us. And so it escalates. They take their bows and arrows and they go out expecting their father. Oh, louder, thank you. Escalate. So they took their bows and arrows and waited on the trail for their father to come. They could see his anger. And so, to save themselves, they shot and killed their father. What are we going to do now? The younger brother said. Well, we'll just have to get a living by ourselves, said the older brother. So they put the tent coverings and the other things on the toboggan. And they left that place because it had such bad memories. And they went on some distance for some time. Well, at this point, they were both past puberty, one of them a few years past, and the older brother, thinking on these things, said that he was going to find a wife for himself, and he wasn't going to have a wife like the lynx woman. He was going to have a wife from humans. The younger brother had never seen a human. He said, don't bother looking for me. He said, I'm not going to do that. And younger brothers. So they went on, and finally they came to a teepee, and here were two nice young women in there, unattached. And so they were invited in. They had a nice meal, and then it was getting down time to go to bed. And so the two sisters both were interested in the older brother, but one of them said, well, why should we share this older brother when there's a nice younger brother here? I'm going to sleep with him. And the younger brother said, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I'm leaving. And so he packed up his stuff, and away he went. And so he was gone for some little distance and some little time. And he got to thinking, it's awfully lonely. He's always been living with somebody, whether it was mice or his brother, after all. And so he thought, it would be nice to have a wife, but I don't want one of those humans. And so he started looking and wishing, deeply wishing. And so he came to a beaver pond, and here was a beaver woman. Now, she didn't look quite like beavers do now. Her teeth were not orange, they were black. And her hair was not nicely groomed out, it was all matted, so she didn't really look that great. And but she was a woman, okay? And so the younger brother, all heedless and eager, said, would you live with me? And she said, well, I'll try it. And so she came out, and he said, okay, well, take the toboggan and set up our teepee over there a ways, and I'm going to get us something to eat. And she thought, beaver pond, eat, he's going to kill a beaver. And so she said, I can only eat the meat of a male beaver, not of a female beaver. Okay. And so she went off, set up a tent, and he killed a male beaver, came and they prepared the beaver, and they ate well, and they went to bed, slept together, and in the morning he opened his eyes. First thing he saw were these big black teeth, this matted hair. You know, you're pretty nice, but you're not very nice looking, and so I can't stay with you. And so he packed up his things, off he went. And she went crying home to her grandmother. She thought she'd been very poorly, well, she had been very poorly used. And her grandmother said, don't that boy's going to come back to you one day. Just shine your teeth, comb your hair, and he's going to come back to you. So the boy went on. Well, we won't hear about all the wives. There were a number. And I might mention one of them was a porcupine woman. Now, that might seem difficult, but porcupines do not have quills everywhere. And porcupines are industrious. And when she set up the tent, the poles had been completely stripped of bark. Clean, beautiful house. He was very impressed. And when he woke up in the morning and he looked at her, he saw this big black nose. And he thought, And so he said, well, I can't stay with you. Off he went again. After, the caribou woman, I have to mention that. Caribou are sort of the Barbies of the subarctic. And so he found a caribou woman, and he said, would you stay with me? And she said, sure. And so she took the toboggan, and the tent was up in a twinkling, and there was smoke rising before he even managed to kill some supper. And so they ate, and just before going to sleep, she had to relieve herself. And when a caribou gets up stern first. And it embarrassed him. And he thought, what would my friends think if every time my wife gets up? And so he was troubled about this, okay, but not so troubled that they didn't spend the night. And so in the morning, first thing again, she has to go out and relieve herself. Well, that's it. He said, if you're going to do that every time you get up, I can't stay with you. Then there was a whiskey jack woman, Canada Grey Jay, and very small, but very neat, very attractive, and very lively. And he was just a younger brother, for goodness sake. And so he asked the whiskey jack woman, she'd be his wife, and she said, well, I'll try it. And so it was dark before the smoke was coming out of the TV, because she'd had a terrible time. She tried to pull the toboggan, and she tried very hard to do her part in this, and her legs broke. And so he took a spare bowstring and wound it round her legs, and you can see those ridges still. Okay? And he helped her get the toboggan there. So in the morning, he said, well, you know, you're really nice and you're very attractive, but you're not quite big and strong enough to do the job, the work. And so I can't stay with you. Well, he'd been making a very big circle, and you can guess where he's coming back to. And he gets to the beaver pond, and he thinks, sitting on a rock again, wishing, hoping, and he sees this beaver woman, and he thinks, I never should have left her. That's what I should have stayed with her. But look how nice she is. And so he asked her, would you come out and be my wife? And she said, on one condition. If ever we come to even a tiny creek, you have to build a bridge across it. Because if I come out of the water to live, I can't go back in the water, or I'll stay. And so he argued. So they lived together for some time, and they traveled, and whenever they came to a creek, he would put a log across it. And one day, late in the day, it had been a very hard day, he came to a creek that was so small that it was frozen solid. He thought, well, I don't have to put a log across this. So he didn't bother. He went on and put a marker where his wife should set up the tent, and he went out looking for food. And when he came back, no tent, no light. Uh-oh. So he retraced his steps. And when he got there, it wasn't a small creek, and it wasn't frozen solid. It was a large creek, and it was open water in the middle of the winter. And there was his wife. And he said, I'm really sorry. He said, should have built you a bridge. Would you come back out and live with me? No, she said. You promised. So now, if you want to live with me, you're going to have to come and live like beavers. I'll drown, he said. Throw me your mitt, she said. So he threw his mitt. She caught it in her teeth. She dove down. She came back up, threw it back to him. Beavers had very good hands, actually. She threw it back to him. It was dry. That's the way it'll be for you if you'll come and live with me. So he did, and he found that he could breathe underwater, and they lived together. And he said, well, if I'm going to live with beavers, there's going to have to be some changes made. In the first place, he said, it's too easy for humans to trap beavers in their houses because there's only one entrance, and really need to have more than one way of getting out of the house. So all the beavers started putting multiple exits on their houses. And then he said it's too easy to break in the roof. So the beaver houses started getting very thick, virtually, not impenetrable, but a hard job to open. The humans, including his older brother, were not pleased with this. And so they did a little pondering, and they found out how this had happened. And the older brother was embarrassed that it was his younger brother, astonished that he would be living with beavers, and angry because he had made life harder for humans. So he determined that he was going to hunt them down. And so they started after the beaver husband and wife. By this time, the younger brother had begun to develop body hair and some of the features of beavers. He's very good at swimming. And so he was partially transformed by this life. When the older brother caught up to them, he started to break in. He blocked the entrances that he could find. He started to break in the roof. And there was still one exit, which the younger brother had very carefully concealed. So they got away and went down the river again towards James Bay. And the older brother was frustrated by this and determined to get his brother. And so he continued to follow them. And he found where they, exhausted, had stopped in another beaver house. And this time he thought he could get them. He was very careful to look for any exits. Started to break it in the second time. They got away. And so he brought all of his conjuring ability to see where his younger brother was. And the younger brother knew this, so he took his wife and they hid in an overhanging rock under the water. So the older brother couldn't find them. And so the older brother moved off some little distance from where they were. And they came out and they swam like blazes down this river to get to James Bay. Didn't work. The humans got there, and this time they barricaded the house. And they left one door open, one exit open, with the older brother there with his axe. And so, as the others were breaking in the house, the younger brother said to his wife, "You go first." And so she did. And so she was killed. And so the older brother said, "All right, now I've got you. Come out." And so the younger brother climbed out the house and went off, head down, with his older brother. And the older brother announced that he was going to have a feast. And the younger brother thought, he's going to try to make me eat the meat of my wife. And so he told his older brother, "I can only eat the meat of a male beaver, not of a female beaver. If the meat of a female beaver should touch my lips, you'll see what will happen." And of course, this is how things transpired. Everybody came to the feast, food was passed around, and when the younger brother touched the meat to his lips, middle of February, roaring sound. All of the rivers were breaking up in the middle of winter. And people were astonished. And while they were astonished, the younger brother ran out of the tent jumped into the river and started for the bay. His older brother grabbed his spear and went after him. Chased, got closer, but before the older brother could get there, the younger brother got to the bay and swam out. And the older brother took all of his power, conjuring power too, and threw a huge rock. And the rock came and just missed the younger brother, who by this time looked entirely like a beaver. And so he survived, he lived in the bay, and he got bigger and bigger until he became what they call the giant beaver. That's the story.